There are a couple of things I wanted to say first before we begin our sermon, and one is that Vernon had talked about the money sent to Port Arthur, the church in Port Arthur. We chose that particular congregation because that's where Jeff and Anita's son and his family attend worship services. And if you are familiar with Anita's Facebook, you saw that they had water up to the pews there in the church building, and that's where the money went. And Jeff and Anita received a call from one of the members there saying, "We received your gift of love." And that's how they put it. Your gift of love to us. And I just thought about Paul writing about the gift of love, and every time I read that phrase now in particular, that's what I will think of us sending money to Port Arthur and helping the church there, our brothers and sisters there, and the gift of love, as they put it. It's a wonderful thing. I know that as Paul went around from church to church to church, and churches helping churches, and he often talks about the gift of love, and that just made it more personal to me there. We have Love Abounding not only in Texas, but in Nicaragua, and we have the boxes in the hallway going to Nicaragua with a smile for a child, and it's been there for some time. But tomorrow, Jeff Norwood and I will take it to Judge Sonia. If tonight I can get some help, guys, loading those boxes, we'll have a trailer this evening after services tonight. If we can get some help loading those boxes in the trailer, and then they'll be delivered tomorrow, and hopefully get down to Nicaragua before Christmas time. And that's a wonderful thing that is being involved with in just all areas around the world, that the congregation is involved in helping others. And I'm so glad to be a part of a congregation that loves and a congregation that helps. It's just wonderful things. And that leads us to the question of this morning when we read the story of Cain and Abel. He said, "Am I my brother's keeper?" As Cain and Abel were there, and Cain said to Abel, "Let's go out into a field." And it was that as he went out to the field that Cain he murdered his brother, put him to death. And God comes along and said, "Where is your brother?" And Cain said, "Well, I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper?" And you think about that question. And think about just some things that had happened just before the time that Cain murders his brother. Number one, he offers up sacrifice to God. Here's a man who is, we would say, religious, right? He's offering up a sacrifice to God. He's participating in worship and goes out and slays his brother. And then he says, I don't know where he is. Am I my brother's keeper? Could it be that we have members here participating in worship and saying to God, I don't know about my brother. Am I my brother's keeper? Do you expect me to keep up with my brother? Could it be? Could it be that we don't know where our brother is? We don't know the situation that our brother is in? We don't know where our brother is? Am I my brother's keeper? Isn't that the preacher's job? Right? Don't we hire him to be the brother's keeper? Right? We've got a brother's keeper program. He's the preacher. Or he's the elders. The elders are the brother's keepers. We don't have to keep up with our brother. We have elders to do that. Or we have deacons in charge. I'm sure we've got a deacon in charge of keeping up with the brothers. That's their job, right? It's not my job. Am I my brother's keeper? Does God expect me to keep up with my brother? Can we talk about the brother's keeper? Let's look at the next slide. We have Cain and Abel in Genesis chapter 4. We also have in Luke chapter 10, verse 25 and following, a lawyer came up to Jesus asking a question about inheriting eternal life. And Jesus said, well, what did Scripture say? And he said, love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus said, go and do it. And he said, wishing to justify himself, he said, well, who is my brother? And then Jesus tells the story of the Good Samaritan. A man was traveling down to Jericho from Jerusalem. And thieves and robbers took him and beat him and left him for dead on the side of the road. And a priest comes by and passes by on the way. And a Levite also, religious men, men who you would say would be worshipers of God, go and pass by the man who's left half dead. But a Samaritan comes and stops and binds up his wounds and takes him to the inn and takes care of him and says to the innkeeper, if this man needs anything, you give it to him. When I come back, I'll take care of that. Well, have you read the modern day version of that particular story, Luke chapter 10? It says, this is Jerry's version of that modern day story. It says this: a man was beaten and left for half dead on the side of the road, and a priest comes by, and he stops by the man, and he sees him, and he says, I see that you're hurting. If you need anything, let me know. And then he passed by. Does that ring a bell? I know that you're hurting. If you need anything, you let me know. And then I'll go on my way. Well, the Levite was a little bit more compassionate. He saw the man by the side of the road. He said, listen. And he took his picture and put it on Facebook. Said, this man is hurting. And he got 34 likes instantly. 4 shares. One person even set up a GoFundMe account for the man on the side of the road. And then he went on his way. Right? I'm not mocking that at all. I'm just saying, isn't that what we do? Is that what we do? Isn't that a modern day? Listen, if there's anything you need, let me know. Well, you're there on the side of the road. If you need anything, looks like you're hurting, you let me know, and I'll be there for you. If you call me. Or we'll share it with everybody on Facebook. But the Samaritan stopped, bound up his wounds, and took care of him. Am I my brother's keeper? What does it mean to be a brother's keeper? What does it mean as we come together as a congregation and God calls this gathering family? He says we are brothers and sisters in Christ. That we are all together as one. And when we gather together, what's my responsibility toward our family, toward my brother? Do I just stop by and say, I know that you're hurting. If you need anything, let me know. Number one, it would be to encourage. I think of number one, encourage is so many times. Over 16 times the word exhort or encourage is given in the New Testament. That we to Hebrews chapter 3 and then 1 Thessalonians 1 to exhort one another. And even in Hebrews chapter 10 verses 22, as we talk about encouraging exhorting one another, even as we see the day approaching, when he talks about not forsaking the assembling of yourselves together, he said, exhort one another as you see that day approaching. We need encouragement because the world is not going to encourage us to do what's good and do what's right. In fact, it ridicules Christians. It ridicules those who hold God in high esteem, who say there is a God, who come together to worship God. And they say, well, you're silly about that. Why do you hold on to those archaic beliefs about a God and about religion and about doing good and loving your neighbor and all that? Isn't that kind of out of date? Encourage one another. If we don't get encouragement when we come together and as a family, if we're not encouraged by one another at this time when we gather, when will we be encouraged? It's not after we leave. When we're out there alone. If we don't do it here, it won't get done. Encourage one another. Help one another. Number 2, to warn my brethren. Ezekiel 3, God said unto Ezekiel, I have set you up as a watchman. When you see the enemy coming, as he had his station on the wall, that he was to look out and look over the area. If he would see the enemy approaching, he is to sound the alarm. And he said, if you sound the alarm, That's your job. If you don't sound the alarm, the blood will be on your hands. We've got to warn one another. Help one another. Whenever we see our brothers straying away, like the lost sheep straying away, well, why didn't the other sheep just go and get them and bring them back? Instead of just watching them wander off. Have we ever watched someone wander off and they're not here Sunday and not among us, and the next Sunday they're not here, and 3 or 4 Sundays pass away, and they're saying, well, I think Brother and Sister Jones hadn't been here in 3 or 4 months now. Maybe we ought to check on them. And we let a year go by and call them and say, hey, we missed y'all. Well, it's been a year since we've been there. Yeah, I know. I've been meaning to get with you and talk with you, and I just hadn't done it. Warn our brothers. We cannot just let them continue straying away, falling away. It requires the right attitude, the right heart. It's not with a holier-than-thou attitude as we go and warn one another. It's with meekness and fear and goodness in our heart. Warn one another. And then along with that, the next one says to seek one another. In Luke chapter 15, whenever the man had 100 sheep, and he came, and 99 came into the fold with him, and one was left. What did the shepherd do? Did he say, 99 out of 100 is not bad. I've got 99. I've got to take care of the 99. They need me. They're hungry. They need to be tended to. They need to be protected. I need to take care of the 99. No, he left the 99. And he went out to seek that one sheep who was not into the fold. Is there one sheep that's not in the fold this morning? Do we look around and see, well, I know so-and-so, because you know who sits beside you. They sit there every week, right? And you know who should be there, and they're not there. And am I my brother's keeper? That we worry about that, think about that, pray about that? To seek a brother when he is lost. And then to stay with Luke chapter 15, on the next one, you had a woman who lost a coin. And so what she did, she cleaned house, searching for that coin. And to prepare yourself, she cleaned up her mess and searched diligently for that coin. And she found that coin. When she found the coin, she rejoiced and called her neighbors in and said, I found this coin. We need to prepare ourselves as we go out and seek those who are lost. Go and warn those about sin, living the righteous life. And Jesus tells about this. When we do it, don't do it with an attitude that well, you've got a speck in your eye that needs to be taken care of while I have this beam in my eye and I'm all right kind of attitude. It's not that. He said, you take care of that beam in your eye, and then you can take care of your brother and sister. Prepare ourselves first. Go with the right attitude, he said. Go with the right heart, as he would have it. That we prepare ourselves. Is there anything we can do better to prepare ourselves in seeking the lost? Prepare ourselves in being your brother's keeper. And so we had the lost sheep, and we had the lost coin. And then we continue in Luke chapter 15, the lost son. Jesus tells the story of the prodigal son, as we called him. A man had 2 sons, and one son comes to him and says, give me my inheritance. And his father gave him the inheritance. And he took it and just wasted it. He had a high old time, don't you know? all the money that he wanted and all the friends that money could buy. And just lived it up until money run out and friends run off, and there he is with nothing. And it says he came to himself. You see, he's feeding the pigs. Now, for a Jewish young man, that's sinking to the lowest level that you could sink, feeding the pigs. Thinking, what have I done? Why am I here? How did I end up in this situation? You think he was wondering, does anybody care about me? And he said, you know, servants in my father's house are taken care better of than I am. I'll go to my father and say, just to make me a servant in your house. And so he went home. And it says the father saw him a long way off. You know, put weight for your brother. The father did not go out and seek his son. The son did not want to be found. He wanted to get as far away from home as he could. And sometimes it is that we have church members that for one reason or another leave the church and don't ever intend on coming back. Just get as far away from that group. You know what they did to me? And they'll go tell about this story or that story or whatever. I'm never going back there. And don't want to be found. But maybe something would happen in their life. And maybe from time to time they think about, well, you know, being a Christian, being part of the church at Hampton wasn't all that bad. I miss it. And maybe they would come back as the prodigal son came back. And the father saw him a long way off. Don't you know that, the Bible doesn't say this, but don't you know that the father spent hours in prayer about his son? Lord, watch over him. Lord, take care of him. I don't know where he is. I don't know what he's doing, but Lord, protect him. Be there with him. May he come back home. Don't you know? I know that's not in Scripture. But being a parent, you know. He saw his son a long way off. Don't you know he looked down the road? That everyone coming just to see, could that be my son? And he saw at this time, he kind of walks like my son walks. He kind of looks like it is my son. And he runs to him. And he's ready to receive him back. He couldn't go and search, like the shepherd did, and brought in that one. But when the son came back, he was ready. And he received him and welcomed him and loved him and wept for him. And that leads us to the next one. To forgive. Am I my brother's keeper? How receptive are we whenever one who has, would say, left the fold, a sheep wandering off, and when they come back, whether you go and search them and bring them back or whether they come back on their own? Family? Are we ready with the finger pointed? You ever come in after curfew? I didn't have a curfew growing up. I came in after curfew one time when I should have been there. I wasn't there. The mom was waiting up. She didn't point that finger at me. She didn't need to. Never did again. That hurt her to wonder, where was I? What was I doing? We didn't have cell phones. I couldn't call her. Worried her. I didn't want to worry her anymore. When one comes back home, are we there with the finger pointing and say, I told you so? Or do we run to meet them? Did the Father forgive the Son? You know He did. Are we ready to forgive? Or we're saying there, well, listen, I know they came back, but listen, I know them, and it won't be long they're going to go off and sin again. I just know they are. They've done it before. I just can't forgive them this time. I just can't forgive them. Well, how many times do you want God to forgive you? In Matthew 6, when it says in the Lord's Prayer that we are to forgive, we are to forgive. And if we don't forgive, God does not forgive us. Now, how many times do you want God to forgive you? Every time. Every single time. Lord, I've messed up. I've turned against you. I've sinned. I knew it was wrong when I did it. I did it anyway. I knew I shouldn't. I knew better than that. And I did it anyway. God, I'm sorry now. I'm sorry I hurt you. I'm sorry I broke your heart. And God forgives. And we as a church family, am I my brother's keeper? We need to forgive. And last of all, we need to love. You know what the great commandment is? Love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus said, upon all this, all the other commandments are there. So we've got a whole Bible of what to do to live the Christian life. The Old and New Testament and all together in there, but you know it all summed up into love. When you love, to love the brotherhood, let brotherly love continue, Hebrews 13 verse 1. To love. Love to the utmost. When you say, am I my brother's keeper? You're really saying, do I love my brother? Do I really care about them? Does it matter to me whether they've wandered off? Does it matter to me if they're hurting? Does it matter? And sometimes we look at the congregation, we're just overwhelmed. I can't keep up with everyone. I can't do everything. And I think about the story of the young boy with the starfish. And he woke up early in the morning and the waves had come, and there on the beach, as he was walking on the beach, there were starfish all along the beach. And he began walking along the beach, and he'd pick up a starfish, he'd throw it back into the ocean. And he'd go and pick up another one, throw it back in the ocean for it to survive. And someone saw him doing that and said, young man said, look at all these starfish. He said, you can't save all of them. And he picked up one, threw it back. He said, I can save one. It matters to that one. We can get overwhelmed. But can we help one? Amen. One. Am I my brother's keeper? Who is your brother? Just like the man wishing to justify himself with Jesus said, well, who is my neighbor? Who is your neighbor? Who is your brother? The one you love. We can encourage you and help you. Am I my brother's keeper? We have responsibilities to our brother. If we don't help, who will? Who will? Can we help just one? One. We encourage you to respond to gospel invitation right now as we stand and as we sing.